All right, so today we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about something that I think a lot of you listeners are probably grappling with. It's this idea of how do we make every second count, especially when we're talking about our teams and their time and all those precious resources that go into keeping a business running.
Yeah, in today's world, right, everyone's talking about efficiency and productivity and all those buzzwords, and it's easy to get caught up in the hype. But what I find fascinating is that a lot of businesses are still making decisions based on gut feeling rather than data.
Yeah, and that's where I think today's deep dive is going to be particularly insightful because we've got some great resources from ReThink Productivity to help us kind of break down this whole concept of work study.
Right. We've got these two brochures they've given us. One's kind of a broad overview of different levels of analysis, and the other one zeroes in on this thing called role study for managers.
Okay, so two sources, both about work study. And I think what's really cool about this is that it's not just theoretical. It's very much grounded in the real world challenges that a lot of us are facing right now, especially those of you in retail and hospitality.
Absolutely. Think about it. Rising labor costs, staff shortages, customers who are more demanding than ever. It's a tough environment out there.
No kidding. So how does work study fit into all of this? I mean, is this just a fancy way of saying we need to work harder and faster?
Not at all. It's really about working smarter, about understanding where those seconds are going and how we can optimize the way we use that most precious resource, which is people's time.
So it's not a new concept, right? I mean, didn't we leave those time and motion studies back in the last century?
Well, the concept's been around for a while, but what's different now is the technology and the data-driven approach that we can bring to it. And that's really what's driving this resurgence of interest in work study.
Okay, so less about stopwatches and clipboards and more about leveraging data to make smarter decisions.
Exactly. And those decisions can impact everything from staffing levels to process improvements.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's dive into those different levels of analysis that ReThink outlines in their brochure. They start this thing called a team efficiency study. And I'm already curious, what does that even mean?
So imagine being able to see a time lapse of your entire team's day. Where are they spending their time? How are they interacting with customers? Are there differences between how different locations are operating?
It's like that bird's eye view, right? You can spot those macro trends and patterns that you might miss when you're just down in the weeds.
Exactly. And what ReThink does really well is benchmarking. They've got this massive database of work study information, so you can see how your team stacks up against industry standards.
Okay, so it's not just about comparing your own teams, but seeing how you measure up against the competition.
Exactly. You might find that your checkout process is taking way longer than the average for similar retail businesses.
Oh, talk about a wake-up call. But I guess that's the point, right? To identify those areas where you're falling behind or maybe where you're actually excelling.
It's about uncovering those hidden opportunities, whether it's bottlenecks that are slowing you down or pockets of downtime that you could be utilizing better.
Okay, so we've zoomed out and gotten that big picture view. Now, let's zoom in. Level 2 is all about task analysis, and this is where we get granular, right?
This is where we break it down, those big picture observations, into those individual tasks that make up your team's day. And we're not just talking about estimates, we're talking about actually understanding how long it takes to do specific tasks.
And I imagine this is crucial for things like scheduling and resource allocation, no more relying on guesswork.
And what's even more fascinating is when you break those tasks down even further into individual steps. ReThink gives this great example in their brochure about warehouse picking.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So they found that a huge chunk of time, sometimes up to 50%, was being wasted on just travel time between locations.
50%?
Yeah.
That's crazy. You'd never realize that just by looking at the big picture numbers.
Right. And once you identify these bottlenecks, and you can start thinking about solutions. Maybe it's optimizing the warehouse layout. Maybe it's adjusting forklift speed limits.
I love those little tweaks. They can make such a difference.
Especially in a high-volume retail environment, shaving off even a few seconds per task can have a massive impact.
Absolutely. All right, and then level 3, they call it deep dive movement analysis. This sounds intense.
This is where it gets really interesting. We're talking about analyzing those high-frequency repetitive tasks that, might seem insignificant on their own, but add up to a huge chunk of time over the course of a day, a week, a year.
So it's not just about working faster. Yeah. It's about working smarter, right? Eliminating those unnecessary movements.
And the methodology they use here is called MTM methods time measurement.
Okay, so without getting too technical, what's the magic of this MTM approach?
It's all about breaking down those movements into tiny, measurable units so you can really get precise about how long a task should take.
Okay, so paint a picture for me. How would this deep dive analysis play out in, say, a fast food restaurant?
Imagine something as simple as assembling a burger. They might find that rearranging the workstation layout could save a few seconds per burger, or that installing a hands-free sauce dispenser could eliminate those little wasted movements.
And when you're making thousands of burgers a day, those seconds add up.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We've only talked about optimizing tasks, but what about optimizing the people leading those tasks?
Okay, let's shift gears then. We've talked about optimizing tasks, but what about optimizing the people leading those tasks? Especially in the world of retail and hospitality, where you often have multiple locations, each with its own manager.
That's where I think things get really interesting because you can have the most efficient processes in place, but if your local leaders aren't empowered and equipped to lead effectively, you're leaving potential on the table.
And I imagine that's a challenge a lot of folks are facing. How do we make sure our store managers, our area managers, all those folks on the front lines are spending their time in the most impactful way?
And that's what this concept of role study helps us understand. It's about taking a data-driven look at what managers are actually doing all day and identifying those tasks that are truly adding value versus those that are bogging them down.
I have a feeling this could reveal some uncomfortable truths.
Oh, for sure. One case study that stood out to me involved an area manager who was spending 15% of their time just responding to messages across email, Teams, WhatsApp.
Oh gosh, I can feel that in my soul. The constant bombardment of messages.
Right. And for this manager, it was preventing them from doing what they're actually hired to do, coaching their store managers, visiting locations, actually driving the business forward.
So it's not just about making those individual tasks more efficient. It's about looking at the bigger picture of how a manager's time is being allocated.
Exactly. And in this case, the company realized they had to rethink their entire communication strategy to free up that manager's time.
Wow, that's a big shift, but it makes sense when you see the data.
And there was another case study where they found an area team support role where almost half the person's time was spent on tasks that didn't even directly contribute to their core responsibilities.
Oh, wow. And think about all the potential if that time could be reclaimed.
It's amazing what your teams can achieve if even a fraction of their day is freed up to focus on those high-value activities.
So this is where I think that data-driven approach becomes so crucial. It's not about micromanaging. It's about providing actionable insights.
It's about creating a culture of continuous improvement, where you're constantly evaluating and optimizing how work gets done.
And I imagine a big part of that is comparing your internal data to those industry benchmarks we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. That's where the real magic happens, seeing where your organization excels and where there's room for improvement, especially compared to your competitors. They have a great visual in the brochure, a chart comparing store managers with manual versus automated stock ordering.
Okay, I love a good visual.
Yeah.
So what does that chart tell us?
It clearly illustrates the potential for time and cost savings when you move from those manual paper-based processes to more automated systems.
Okay, so we've gone from the big picture of team efficiency all the way down to the minutia of individual movements. But before we move on, let's let this all sink in for our listeners out there. What's the key takeaway you want them to walk away with?
I think the big takeaway here is that work study isn't about making people work harder. It's about making them work smarter.
It's about challenging those assumptions and questioning those "we've always done it this way" habits.
Exactly. And it's about embracing a more objective analytical approach to optimize every aspect of your operations.
And that's a journey we're going to continue exploring in part 2 of this deep dive, where we'll talk about the how of optimizing tasks and the tools and strategies you can use to make those improvements stick. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back after a short break.
Welcome back. I'm excited to kind of pick up where we left off and really get into the nitty-gritty of how do we put these work-study insights into action, because we can talk about data all day long.
Right. Data's great, but it's what you do with it that matters.
Exactly. And one of the most powerful tools, and I think particularly relevant for retail and hospitality, is this idea of process mapping.
Okay, process mapping. Remind us what that is and how it fits into this whole picture.
Think of it like you're creating a visual roadmap of a specific process. So you're literally outlining each step from start to finish.
So you're taking that task analysis data and making it tangible, something you can see and interact with.
Exactly. And what's great about it is it's collaborative. You're not just dictating changes from head office. You're involving the people who actually do the work.
I love that you're empowering your team to be part of the solution.
Their insights are invaluable. They're the ones who know the ins and outs of the process better than anyone.
And it gives them a sense of ownership over those changes, which is so important.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's say we've mapped out our processes. We've identified some areas for improvement. What happens next?
Yeah, where do we go from there?
Well, this is where we can start getting strategic about optimization. And ReThink talks about 3 key areas: task elimination, task simplification, and task automation.
Okay, let's unpack those, starting with task elimination. It sounds kind of scary. Are we talking about cutting jobs here?
Not necessarily. It's more about taking a hard look at each task and asking, is this really necessary? Does it add value? Could we achieve the same outcome in a different way?
It's about challenging those assumptions, right? Those, we've always done it this way, habits.
Exactly. And sometimes the answer might be to just get rid of the task altogether.
Can you give us an example of a task that might be ripe for elimination in the retail world?
Sure. Let's say you have a process where every single customer receipt needs to be signed by a manager before it can be filed. In today's digital world, that extra step might be completely redundant.
Yeah, it's not adding any real value, just slowing things down.
Exactly. Okay, so what about task simplification?
How do we approach that one?
This is where you get really granular. You look at each step in a task and you ask yourself, can we make this simpler? Can we eliminate any unnecessary actions or movements?
And this is where those deep dive movement analysis observations come in handy, right? Those little tweaks that can save seconds here and there.
Absolutely. And again, involving your frontline team is crucial. They're the ones who can spot those little things that make a big difference.
Like a barista making coffee. Maybe there's a way to rearrange the equipment or streamline the steps that could shave a few seconds off each drink.
Exactly. And when you're making hundreds of lattes a day, those seconds add up.
Okay, and then finally we have task automation. This is the big buzzword these days. Everyone's talking about AI and robots taking over.
Right. But like any tool, it needs to be used strategically.
So it's not about replacing humans with robots.
It's about finding that sweet spot where technology can augment human capabilities.
It's about freeing up people to focus on those tasks that require uniquely human skills.
Exactly, like those repetitive data entry tasks. Automate those, and you not only free up time, but you also reduce errors.
Win-win. But I imagine it's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
You're right, you need to carefully consider which tasks are best suited for automation.
And you don't want to lose that human touch that's so crucial in retail and hospitality.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance where automation enhances the customer experience.
Like self-checkout kiosks or online ordering systems.
Exactly. Giving customers more control and convenience.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the how of optimizing tasks, but what about the who, the people leading these initiatives?
Right. How do we make sure our leaders are equipped to create a culture of continuous improvement?
It starts with setting clear expectations and providing the right support.
And I think a big part of that is empowering managers to delegate effectively.
Delegation can be a struggle, especially in fast-paced environments.
Managers might feel like they need to control everything, or they're worried about overburdening their team.
But effective delegation is about identifying the right person for the job, giving them clear instructions, and then stepping back.
And providing the necessary support along the way.
Exactly. And creating a culture of feedback and continuous learning.
It's not just about optimizing tasks, it's about optimizing how we work together as a team.
Exactly. And that's an ongoing journey, but even with the best intentions, you need the right tools to make this happen.
You're talking technology, and I gotta say, it can feel overwhelming, all the apps and platforms out there.
It's a lot, but the key is to focus on your specific needs.
So start with the problem, not the solution.
Exactly. Once you've identified your needs, you can start exploring different tools. And there are a few key areas to consider: task management, software communication platforms, and data analytics tools.
Okay, let's break those down, starting with task management software. What are the benefits there?
Task management software can really streamline workflows, assign tasks, track progress, improve collaboration.
So it's like a digital to-do list for your whole team, but way more sophisticated.
Exactly. And there are options for every budget, from simple to-do lists to robust project management platforms.
Okay, what about communication platforms? We talked earlier about that area manager drowning in messages.
Right, and there's no easy answer because every organization has its own communication style.
But the key is to be intentional about which platforms you use and how you use them.
Exactly, and establish clear guidelines and expectations. Which platform For what purpose? How do we respond to messages? How do we avoid those unnecessary interruptions?
It's about finding that balance between staying connected and creating space for focused work.
And that's where technology can help, streamline communication, reduce noise.
Okay. And finally, data analytics tools.
These are crucial for measuring the impact of your work study initiatives.
This is where you see if all this effort is actually paying off.
Exactly. You can track those key metrics, identify trends, measure the effectiveness of your strategies.
So it's not about data for data's sake. It's about using that data to make decisions.
Absolutely. And the tools can range from simple spreadsheets to sophisticated business intelligence platforms.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground. It's clear that work study can have a huge impact, but there's one crucial aspect we need to explore: the human element.
Right, because you can have the most optimized processes in the world, but if your employees aren't engaged and motivated, you're not going to see those gains.
Exactly. We'll dive into that fascinating topic in part 3 of this deep dive, so stay tuned. Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into work study. We've talked about optimizing tasks and processes and using all the right tools and technology. But as we wrap things up, I want to kind of shift gears and talk about something that I think often gets overlooked in this whole quest for efficiency, and that's the human element.
Yeah, you can have all the data and the fancy systems in the world, but if your employees aren't engaged and motivated, you're not going to see those gains in productivity.
It's like having a shiny new sports car with the flat tire.
Yeah.
All the potential, but you're not going anywhere.
Exactly. So how do we make sure our teams have those metaphorical inflated tires? What really motivates people to bring their A game to work, especially in these industries like retail and hospitality, that can be really demanding.
Yeah, it's not always easy to stay motivated when you're dealing with long hours and difficult customers.
Right, and that's where understanding a bit of psychology comes in. One of the most well-established theories in this area is self-determination theory.
Okay, self-determination theory. I'm listening.
So this theory basically identifies 3 core psychological needs that drive motivation: autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
All right, let's break those down, starting with autonomy. What does that mean in the context of work?
Autonomy is about feeling like you have some control over your work, not just being a cog in the machine, but having some say in how things are done.
So it's about empowering employees on the front lines to make decisions.
Exactly. And when people feel like they have choices and some ownership over their work, they're more likely to be engaged and motivated.
But wouldn't that lead to inconsistencies, across different locations? How do you balance that need for autonomy with maintaining brand standards?
That's where clear guidelines and training come in. You can give employees the freedom to make decisions within a defined framework. It's like giving them a roadmap, but letting them choose the route.
Exactly.
Okay, so the next one is mastery.
Mastery. No, I like the sound of that.
This is all about feeling competent and skilled in your work. People are naturally motivated to learn and grow, to challenge themselves.
It's that sense of accomplishment, right? Seeing yourself improve.
And I think this is especially important in roles that can become repetitive or routine, like a lot of jobs in retail and hospitality.
Right. How do you keep people engaged and prevent them from feeling like they're just going through the motions?
That's where providing opportunities for growth and development comes in. It could be cross-training mentorship programs, even just giving someone the chance to lead a small project.
So it's about showing them that there's a path for growth within the company.
Exactly. When people feel like they're learning, they're less likely to get bored.
Makes sense. Okay, and the third element you said was purpose.
Purpose, this is about feeling like your work has meaning, like it's contributing to something bigger than yourself.
But that can be hard in those frontline roles, where it's easy to feel like you're just serving transactions all day long.
Absolutely. That's where connecting the dots between those individual tasks and the bigger picture becomes so important.
So how do we do that? How do we help employees see the forest for the trees, so to speak?
Communication is key. Share your company's mission and values. Talk about the impact your business has on the community. Celebrate successes. Acknowledge the contributions of your team.
It's about creating that sense of shared purpose where everyone feels like they're part of something bigger.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about the psychology, but what about the practical stuff? How do we actually apply these principles in a real-world setting?
Yeah, give us some tangible things we can do.
Well, first involve employees in the work study process. Don't just spring changes on them from on high.
Right. We talked about this with process mapping, but it's really about extending that collaborative spirit to everything.
Ask for their input. Listen to their ideas. Make them feel heard.
And when they feel ownership over those changes, they're much more likely to embrace them.
Absolutely. Second, provide those opportunities for growth and development that we talked about.
Invest in training, create mentorship programs, encourage people to stretch themselves.
And third, communicate the why behind work-study initiatives, explain the rationale, and how it benefits everyone.
Transparency is key. When people understand the bigger picture, they're more likely to be on board.
And don't forget to celebrate successes. When you achieve those improvements through work study, acknowledge them, recognize the contributions of your team.
It's amazing what a difference those little things can make. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the technical side, the psychology, and some practical strategies.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. And I guess as we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought to ponder. We've talked a lot about efficiency and optimizing processes, but what if the real goal of work study isn't just about doing more with less, but about doing better with less? What if it's not just about speed and output, but about quality and meaning, about creating a work environment where people feel valued and engaged and fulfilled, where they can bring their best selves to work each day?
I love that.
So as you go forth and embrace the power of work study, remember, it's not just about the numbers, it's about the people. It's about creating a workplace where efficiency and humanity go hand in hand.
Where every second counts towards a better future for everyone.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of work study. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and inspiration. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those efficiency engines running.